Well, it is a beautiful day here on Thursday at 11 a.m. and we welcome your participation in our church facility planning webinar. We are expecting thousands of people from all over the universe to join us, if not thousands, at least a dozen. And it is our ministry and our mission to help churches with their vision, their facility plans, their financing, and their fundraising. And today's topic, church facility planning, before you conduct a church capital campaign, is, in my opinion, a component of wisdom. Learn everything you can, plan ahead, consult experts before you move into prayer and discernment. That was the advice from Aristotle thousands of years ago. And I really like that. So we're going to equip you today with a good deal of information and expertise. And for us to tailor our presentation to your particular needs, we would invite you to click on the chat button right now and just write in your name and tell us where you're from. And you can start thinking about your second assignment. Your second assignment as we go forward will be to type in questions and concerns that you might have. Now, I offer this tailoring because between the three of your presenters today, we have about 70 years of experience in serving churches, which each of us share the values of serving churches, and we're voracious listeners and learners, and so we have a great deal to share. So please take a moment right now, click on the chat button, tell us where you're from, and we will leap into action. Now you will get the video of this webinar in the mail at the conclusion of today's webinar. It'll be emailed to you. You can see on your screen my phone number during the webinar. You can feel free to text me at that phone number. You can also access our other webinars that we have available at that website on church development under our resources. And you can send me an email as well. Church development has been helping churches since 1992. We've raised over a couple $100 million in capital campaigns and about another $800 million in annual stewardship efforts. So we've learned a lot, and we study the secular world, the academic world, the corporate world, to bring everything we can to share with our churches that we care so much about. We're a little bit different from other firms. We base the prayer, the solicitation in prayer and not pressure. We want to build the community of the church. Not only do we base our work in scripture, but many years of research as well. Our favorite scripture is from 1 Peter 4:10, which I liked as I learned this as a young person, that everything we have comes from God, and it's up to us to figure out how to be a conduit for God's grace. Here is our agenda. Number one, the big mistake to avoid. Number two, the keys to success. And number three, your initial steps. As soon as we hang up today, you can leap into action with those initial steps. We will spend the bulk of our time on item number two, the keys to success. And the expertise from Joe and John is very valuable. They can save you years and millions of dollars of time because of their experience. Now, I've got 30 years experience, but that pales in comparison to Joe and John. They are very experienced and have an entire firm, RDG, to back them up. We've got a ton of research from a lot of sources, and I've written this book. I've written 4 books, but if you'd like this book about the stewardship system, please give me a call or an email, and I'll send you a free one. Now I want to shift over to Joe and John and ask you two to introduce yourselves and brag a little bit. Joe, since you're at the top of my screen, would you mind starting?
Sure. Thanks, Dennis. Joe Katulak with RDG Planning and Design. I am an architect and partner within the firm, and I oversee our worship market. And so I am the face of our projects on the RDG side, our project team. for all of our faith-based clients, working with Catholic churches, Protestant churches, those that worship in an evangelical model. And as it says there, hundreds of churches served. We are up over the 150 mark for projects that we've done. Now, not all of those are obviously worship spaces. There's education components to that and fellowship components as well, whether that's a social hall or other office and conference type spaces, meeting rooms, storage. There's never enough storage in a church facility, no matter who you are. As it says there, we are part of the Four Pillars Collaborative with Dennis, which is how we managed to find ourselves in these seats this morning with you all. And you can find us and a lot of our work at rdgusa.com. And John, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Joe. John Sova with RDG Planning Design. I have been with RDG for over 40 years. So this has been my life and my home. I've been working on all different kind of church projects since 1989. Have made some transitions in the firm where Joe is now leading the main focal point for RDG in our church work. So you could say now I do work for Joe, but I'm a managing principal RDG and happy to be here this morning. I did want to comment on the third bullet down, the Four Pillars Collaborative. You will hear a tone of what we speak about today in the idea of a team and the team concept, and the Four Pillars Collaborative, with Dennis as a part of in church development, the fundraising side. There's also pieces of it that deal with the strategic planning side for your church congregation. There's a financial piece that we have invested in the Four Pillars, and the architecture piece, which again, we'll be chiming in on today, some of the architectural components or how we approach projects once you get started, thinking about getting started or have started.
Well, thank you, John. Did you say 40 years?
Yeah, it doesn't show.
No, so you started when you were born. Is that what I'm hearing?
At 4 years old. I will admit it was 4 years old. So thank you, Dennis, for I think we share, in fact, we were talking a little bit earlier, some of the TV commercials that we have seen that Joe has never seen in his life when we were both younger.
That's right. So yeah, black and white is only a concept.
I saw it. We had it.
It was my reality for a long
Yes. Yes.
well, that's great. Well, it's great to work with you guys. And I am just so appreciative. Thanks a million for volunteering. And thanks for helping the many churches. We share that life mission. Okay, so let's leap into action. This agenda, it could take us a couple hours to go through thoroughly, or even a couple days. And we could even help your church, as you do planning, walk through this exact agenda as you assemble your team to begin planning your facility. We would be there as volunteers. We can't give you a ton of time because we have to make a living. But if you've got a Zoom meeting set up with your team, we can walk through this same agenda with them. So we're going to begin with the most common mistake, which looks like a train wreck, sounds like a train wreck, and feels like a train wreck. And I've seen this many times before, designing the Taj Mahal on a chapel budget. Joe, do you mind talking for a minute about the best practice, and then talk for a minute about what to not do?
Yeah, I think to start off, one is understanding what your starting point actually is. You may be part of a committee, or you've been tasked to form a committee to understand, what does this next project look like, or a first project look like? What's the realities? Do you have any past experience with building projects as part of your church? Would this be the first one? So understanding what exactly your starting point is, build a good team around you, people with some visionary capabilities, but then also we want to make sure that we're putting a realistic kind of bow around all of that. And so when you engage with, whether it's Dennis to begin with, or another financial representative, or as an architect, we want to understand what your starting point is so that we can help steer you from the initial meeting towards a viable solution and kind of avoid getting down the road where you're at a project that's 40,000 square feet when you can afford a 10,000 square foot project, and understand the realities of construction and timeline and the whole process from start to finish.
That's great. Well, I appreciate that. And I appreciate the 4 points that you have down here. The financial plan, the vision, fundraising plan, that leading to the architectural master planning. And
Dennis, I'd like to jump in there a little bit if I may.
Yeah.
My first reaction when you said, what is the common mistake? The screen looks like never build a church right next to a fast moving train line for what might happen. But a good analogy, because I immediately thought of getting off track or jumping off the tracks. And so I think those 4 bullet points there are about having a plan in place, and don't start necessarily that you think you have the end in mind or you know what the answer is, because all of those things, financial plan, obviously, but then what is your congregation? What's the vision for multiple people so that you can reach consensus? Again, the fundraising plan, what are the realistic goals? And then an architectural master plan. Many times when we do an architectural master plan, it involves years and years of potential projects. But it's done that way so that you don't build something in maybe a phase 1 or bite off more than you can chew and just then kind of almost destroy the rest of the process for many years to follow. So it's a well thought out plan that obviously from your picture, one more time, stay on the tracks and make sure you know where the tracks are headed.
So you said a couple of terms there that sound real important to me, like the word phases. Is that on your mind all the time as you approach a church facility plan?
It has to be. We've had several churches that we've worked with for over 20 years, and we've done a number of phases, and some phases are quite large. The building of a church or the building of a middle school, and other phases are smaller, but they're all about trying to continue to build momentum over that 20 or 30-year span. We'll often do master planning work that a project doesn't come to fruition for 5 or 7 years from now, because they're working on building that consensus on what's the right phase, understanding how they're growing. If they're a new church that's starting up, understanding when is the right time to build, and kind of what's that sort of maximum or a tipping point for energy and enthusiasm towards a building project. And that timing can be just as critical as the plan, so that you're building momentum really as a long-term investment, whether you're building 1 phase or 6 phases.
I'll add a specific example that fortunately RDG wasn't involved in, but we did hear about it in a community when I jumped onto the architectural master plan. And you may have an existing building or planning a new site. You need to understand the limitations of that site, and that's part of the master plan. What are the building setbacks? What are zoning issues? What are things that the city may ask you to do in terms of architecture, style, or certain things? We were involved in not RDG project, but saw a project where they planned out a church, and they were going to add a school and a gymnasium to it. And they found out in the second phase that a zoning line for setbacks on the site wasn't where they thought it would be. And so they built this nice museum. And if you go to our gymnasium, no idea why I said museum, gymnasium, went to build the building, and the city said, you can't go in that setback. And so there's this nice 100-foot by 70-foot gymnasium with one of the corners is cut out like a piece of pie because they couldn't build past the property line, which was different than they thought. And so in one corner of the gym, you have the out of bounds line about 6 inches from the wall. Those are things that you don't want to see happen. And we want to make sure never, ever happen. And so that master planning process is pretty key.
Oh, it's real important. Man alive. I would hate to play on that basketball court.
Well, you could pass yourself a shot, it would bounce right back to you and you'd go in for a layup because of the angle.
Oh my goodness. That's horrible. That's horrible. Well, I worked at a church about 15 years ago in Kansas City, that they started out with a bare plot, a large plot of land, and they thought they were thinking ahead by building the rectory right next to the church. And then when they hired me to come in to expand the facility, the first thing we discovered is that we have to tear down that rectory in order to expand the facility. And it's just throwing away hundreds of thousands of dollars because nobody did that master planning. It was such a bummer. Hundreds of thousands of dollars mowed down. That was so sad.
Great example, Dennis. You get a gold star for that example. Yes.
Oh, it was heartbreaking. And I knew the people personally, and everybody just shook their head like, how do we let that go? Ay caramba. Okay, so let's move on past the mistake to the meat of our presentation today. The keys to success, assembling a quality team. And you all are at the core of that. So when you're part of assembling a quality team, what does that look like and sound like and feel like for you all as church facility planners?
So I think part of it is knowing who is going to be the decision maker or decision makers within the room, making sure that you have within your committee or group that's going to be studying and looking at hiring an architect and going through that process, some trusted advisors and folks that have varying areas of expertise. Having somebody who is maybe in the financial realm as an accountant, somebody who maybe oversees or is part of a construction company. Obviously, you want your ministry leaders there as part of it. The person who's overseeing your education, the person who's involved in your music ministry, the pastors or leaders of the congregation, as well, to kind of all be equal partners at the table, so that you can have some really strong open dialogue. And then part of your architectural team and part of what we do at RDG is bring the right professionals to the project and to the table. So whether that's, the 4 that we have listed here, and a financial expert, a visioning leader, Dennis as the fundraising pro, and then obviously the knowledge of the congregation. But we also, as RDG, want to take a holistic approach to the building process, even if we're just in the master planning phase, and understand, are there key artisans that we should be bringing to the table? Is there anybody to John's point earlier about the city, are there any key stakeholders at the city level that we need to be having conversations with? Because believe it or not, building a church is not always a popular opinion for some neighborhoods. And so making sure that we are taking the right steps, that we have the right people in the room to have those meetings and providing quality information from the very beginning is critical.
Dennis, your image of the ensemble, the band there that you've used, is a great example of this process is always bigger than one person, but doesn't want to get so big that it's unmanageable. There are ways to, and in the process that RDG goes through, there are ways that working with the church group, we can draw information out of the entire congregation at certain times in the process, if that's what's needed. And a lot of times that's a good step, because that gets buy-in for more than a couple people. A couple people in terms of how are you going to pay for it, how are we going to fund it, et cetera. So the quality team, as Joe has referenced, there isn't a set number, but getting the right representation, you're probably talking about a group of maybe 6 to 10 to 12 folks that are part of a key team to take you through the process, and then bring in other congregation members as needed in a way that they feel like they have been a part of the process.
Yeah, I'm so happy to hear you use that language of buy-in and ownership. So when we run a church capital campaign, if it is one person's idea, often an ivory tower who says, I have an idea, everybody else needs to give money to it. Well, we don't raise much money. But when we take the approach that you have just outlined, where we really maximize engagement from all corners of the congregation, we raise a lot more money and people are happier. And I feel like the end product is better as well. It's two heads are better than one. I remember reading in history about the Bay of Pigs disaster, and Kennedy changed his decision-making process after that to include what you just said. Let's get a diversity of thought in the room so that we can look at this problem from all different angles. So I really like that. So this is a great start. Okay, let's move to number 2B, which is the organized process. So I know that there's got to be a system, and I know that, you mentioned a moment ago the 20-year view, the big picture. You talked about phases. Talk more about what's on your mind when someone calls you and says, Joe, we want to build a new building. What's the process? What are the questions you're going to ask them? What's the advice you're going to give them?
Well, I think it goes back to what we started talking about is what's their current starting point? Who do they feel they want to bring to the table for their committee? Who those decision makers are going to be as we move a process forward. But then also, just an understanding of a current facility, if that's the case, or understanding what the site requirements might be. We joke when we kind of kick off in our initial meeting. So you're considering building a church. Have you thought about plumbing, parking, and storage? Because you end up with maybe a lot more plumbing fixtures than you think you're going to need to be able to accommodate the number of people that are going to be coming to your facility. You're certainly going to want more parking than city minimums usually require, because the days of everybody piling out of one, van and the whole family gets out are kind of gone. And the realities of people needing to run here, there, and everywhere on a Sunday generally means that there's 2 cars for one family. And so what are those parking requirements, which again impacts site and city? And 2, storage. There's never enough storage in a church. And as soon as we put in a storage room, it's full. And the question is, how can we make that a little bit bigger? Can we add 3 more feet here or 4 more feet there to get those rooms a little bit bigger? Or what about a basement? So there's some key starting points architecturally that we want to make sure we're addressing, but then really it's about setting goals for the project, goals for the design of it, goals for the outcomes, and making sure that if we go back to the train metaphor, that those goals keep us on track and moving forward.
Dennis, if I had to summarize this slide as well, I think the bullet point 2, vision consensus meetings, is really critical. That all of those 5 bullets get you to a well thought out plan. And it may not be the plan or what you envisioned early. There may be something that comes to light that is then different where you're thinking. I can think of a specific parish that we worked for in Omaha, Nebraska. This was 20 years ago. We had a very solid committee members representing all parts of the parish, schools, corporations, foundations, you name it. It was a really good group. And when we got down to what was really going to happen for a phase 1, there was a debate amongst building the school or building the church. And I think all of the committee members would have voted 10-0 to build the church first. The church was the sexy object. It was going to be the place for, in this case, going to mass. But it also was, as they determined, was not the best way to grow the parish. That getting the school started and getting that congregation solidified with school and a goal they chose in consensus, didn't vote, in consensus. Voting means sometimes people lose, but in consensus, that building the school first, or the first phase of the school, was the best thing. Well, that was in year 1. By year 4, they had started building the second phase of the school. year 8, the parish had grown enough that they could build the church. We've now been involved with six different phases for them over the 20 years. And I think if you'd have sat down and meeting 2 or 3 would have had, those 6 phases would not have been in the order that they would have all preferred, maybe because of what their preconceptions were. But in the end, going through that master plan, the program, where was the money going to come from? How did they build the congregation? It worked out just almost, I'm using it today as example because it is definitely one of the better total projects we've put together.
Well, you're answering my next question, which I just got. It's embarrassing. I have a relative who's an architect who said they would do the work at a discounted rate. How should I proceed? Now, just you talking about the thing, I've been in a million churches. I've been doing church capital campaigns for 30 years. But as soon as Joe says plumbing and storage, right? I mean, those are not thoughts that go on in my mind. And so how to proceed? Well, it sounds to me like the advice would please do not proceed. Am I right?
Well, I think it comes down to how much church experience do they have. I think, oftentimes, we want to foster connections and relationships, and we do that here at RDG. That's part of how we've been involved with as many church projects as we have, and how we have, multiple decade-long relationships with some of those churches is we've worked to foster and build that relationship. So not discounting that, but I think, that there's some maybe unseen, which I think is the key, is that a lot of the expertise when it comes to worship space design are things that, if done correctly, you would never notice. And that can be as simple as lighting, the acoustics of the space, the size requirements. So, how much pre-function or gathering space do you need before you actually cross the threshold into the worship space? And so there's a lot of knowledge that you glean over 10 years or 40 years of doing church work about what some of those best practices are, and also who those trusted advisors or preferred consultants might be to help along in that process.
Mm-hmm. Well, gosh, I appreciate your expertise. Every time you say 10 years or 20 years in relationship with the church, I guess that's the proof that the expertise and the relationships do count for something very important. John, do you have any additional thoughts you'd like to contribute related to that particular sticky question?
I think Joe hit on it, Dennis. Thanks for asking it. I would say all architects are good architects, but again, it comes down to experience. And the experience of working in a religious facility, they're no secret that they can cost more money than a typical even school or bank building or corporate building. There are things that go into religious facilities that are more detailed, can be more ornate. They can be done very cost effectively. But I think I hear the term a lot of times, hopefully you go to a doctor or a dentist that has experience in your particular problem. That's why they're a specialist. Not to say that architects can be a specialist, but corp or religious work is one of our major markets. And we would recommend, whether it's us or anybody else, make sure that you got an architect that understands religious facilities and how to work with congregations and how to get buy-in, so that the people that you're going to ask for money are going to want to give money.
Yeah. Well, as you're talking, I'm reminded of that quote I remember from a Malcolm Gladwell book, who said it takes 10,000 hours of direct experience to really think of yourself as an expert. And it might take 10 or 20 years to have those hours at a specific, precise task. So I can see that. That makes perfect sense. So I very much appreciate your expertise. Okay, now let's move to number 2C. The keys to success. Inherently within that, you talked about this already, developing a facility program and a master plan. Joe, do you want to walk through these concepts?
Sure. So the way I would describe a facility program is, what are the spaces that you need to fulfill your ministry if there's no building envelope to envelop them? So whether sort of site unseen, building unseen, what spaces do you need? You may need a space that has 8 classrooms and your current facility only has 3. You may need a space that seats 400 with the ability to expand an extra 200 in the future. So the facility program is kind of a long-term, again, that sort of 10 to 20 year outlook about what do you need now, understanding those needs, and what might you need in the future, void of building and site. So we want to get it all on the page. We want to understand some parameters to those. What are some of the technology requirements for the classrooms or the worship space, or a fellowship type space. So that's the facility program. The facility program it's a document. It's a written document with estimated square footages, based on our experience and the needs of the church and congregation, and then some descriptors about what those spaces might want to feel like, whether it's hospitality room or a family room that really wants to have soft seating, kind of feel like a living room versus a church space that maybe does a lot of AV work and kind of needs a black box type space, because we've done that, and we've also done ornate Byzantine style churches. So we run the gamut, and we try and tell your church's story through the architecture. And then the master plan is really the roadmap forward. So it might be the roadmap for phase 1, but it also needs to be the roadmap for phase 6, 7, 8, and understanding what those phases might be, and start to break down what might be a significantly larger facility than you can afford day one, but to the point of not having to tear down a rectory that's in the way of future growth. We want to make sure that everything has its place on the site or within the building, and not everything from the facility program may fit on the site. So it may be a requirement that we look at a different site, or we address the architecture in a different way, where maybe we have to go more vertical if the city zoning allows, so on and so forth. But it really lays out the next 20 years of your facility based on the program. So we're not just, closing our eyes and throwing at a dartboard to try and get to a potential solution. We want to make sure that it's well thought out, that we've got the right information, that we've got the right input from the congregation at large, and then those individuals who are on that driving committee.
This is a lot of big picture thinking.
It is. It requires kind of a visionary thought process. And then we always try and base that in reality too. So once we have a master plan together, we'll work on putting kind of a preliminary cost estimate together in terms of what's the order of magnitude for the total project if it were to be built today. If we break it out over phases, and over the last couple of years, it's been a little bit harder to do that, just with the way that escalation has been occurring. But we've got a lot of historical data that we fall back on to help kind of determine this phase is maybe X dollars now. If you wait 3 years, it could be an additional amount. Not to scare anybody off, but it's all part of having the right and quality information to make good decisions.
Because you're thinking of phases just right out of the chute. As soon as that master plan is done, you're looking at what in the sequence, probably.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
What's logical? Huh.
Dennis, I'm going to refer back to your chart again here for a second, or the graphic you have in there. As I think about this, that there's congregations looking at this presentation, hopefully, and maybe they're in different spots. And the one spot would be take everything away there on the graphic that you have and think of it as a blank canvas. And then you can build from there. Okay, think of it as a blank canvas, but the roads, the 2 roads left and right are already there, and you've got to work within the roads because the city built the roads. Look at that as, and this happens, we've been involved with projects, a worship community might decide to build something related to additional school or assisted living. Well, squint and picture that the bottom half of your graphic is already there. What happens to the top half in terms of programming and a master planning? Or I'm going to go to the far end. you may be a congregation that's been around for 100 years and you've gotten to the point now, we need to add something in our community related to early education, which is very popular, and churches are getting into early education and schools. So you may have a complete facility there, worship space is up and running, another school's up and running. You got everything you need, but you decide to build an early learning center. Well, it may only go in one spot, or there may be several choices of it again. And so you can look at that facility program that Joe's talked about and that master plan, and it's a roadmap, and everything might have a place to go in, and you might develop that roadmap for 1 year because you're nearly done. Or as I referenced back to the parish that we worked on, it was a roadmap that set the direction for us for 20 years in completing projects for them.
Well, I got another question that just popped up here, and it's the obvious one. How much time does it take to produce a facility program and a master plan? And ballpark, what's it cost?
So timing, typically it's a several month long process to move from first meeting through final presentation. There's some timing within the year in which it's easier to gain the information that we need to help put together a program and a master plan. Summers are not great times to start that process. You have folks traveling for vacation, you've got busy summer schedules. So we always try, if we can, to align those and start that process in the fall. So as people are starting school again, typically attendance swells in that August, September range. And you've got people engaging. So trying to work through that process, and then that gives us a few months towards the end of the year, and then a few months at the beginning of the year, if necessary, to either introduce a master plan as part of a Christmas or New Year's celebration, or if the process takes a little bit longer, depending on size and scale of the project and how quickly the committee really wants to move through the process. It may coincide with something that aligns with Easter or kind of a spring celebration in that regard. So just as important as how much time it takes, it's about the right time to start that process and launch that. So that's a little bit about the timing. John, do you want to speak?
I appreciate that.
I'll take
the win. That's a big deal.
Yeah,
I'll take the financial part of that. And again, Dennis and others, that what Joe's describing there obviously depends on the size of the facility you're thinking about or what it's going to do. I would say that 90% of the projects that we've done, varying sizes, this program master planning piece probably is in the range of $10,000 to $30,000. Not necessarily to scare anybody on either one side or the other, but to create a program, a master plan on something smaller, $10,000. Something larger, probably $30,000. There's more information to gather. There's more options to talk about. There might be more people involved, but you're not designing. And that's the key here. You're not going to get a image of what a facility looks like, whether it be a new church or a new school, and I'm doing a master plan program. You're going to get good roadmap information that we believe in at this point, but you start to think about pricing and fundraising, that you do understand, okay, we need 15,000 square feet or 20,000 square feet. And we can tell you whether that's a school or a church facility, the cost per square foot. So it's pretty early on that you want to get this coming together. So your multiple steps to follow are well thought out or realistic in terms of what you can raise. Dennis, your line of work. And I know that fundraisers that we work with appreciate realistic numbers and understanding those numbers, because you really only get one time usually to go ask a congregation for money. It's you can't make big mistakes and come back to them and say, oh, guess what? We forgot we were going to do this, and now we need another $1 million. That appetite doesn't appear to be too healthy. And Dennis, maybe you can chime in on that, because I think that's our key to success as well.
Well, it is. And it's in my history doing a couple hundred church capital campaigns, several times I have had a donor step up and say, I will cover the cost of the pre-capital campaign, pre-facility program and master planning costs. And that's what fundraisers do. And so I don't think people should be afraid when you say $10,000 to $30,000. A, it seems like a really good investment, and B, there's a pretty good probability that a donor might underwrite those costs. So do the right thing. Do the right thing, and we can help you find a way to get it paid for. This is just really helpful. It's really helpful. Now, as we move towards closure, I want to move from the big picture to the really concrete. So the people who are with us right now and the people who will view this in the future, on their minds is, well, what's my first step? What do I do? And that's what I would like to talk about next. So the initial steps, what advice would you give a pastor or a staff member or a volunteer who is watching this right now? I would like to say, go hire a fundraiser, get a church capital campaign expert, but that's not the right thing. So please, Joe, if you don't mind, talk for a moment about what you hope that churches do right at the beginning of the process.
Well, I think, a lot of it up here on the screen is about building that team, finding that right team. And that's important because that same team could be the person that's interviewing a potential architect. That team is the people who are interviewing, hopefully, a fundraiser like Dennis. They're the person who are the people who would hopefully be involved in selection of a contractor if you want to bring a contractor on board, and an architect can help lead through that process. But you're kind of in it for the long haul at some point when you say yes to being a part of a planning committee. And folks may fall off or change roles throughout that timeline, from initial ask through maybe dedication or groundbreaking or something of that nature. But a level of continuity across the team and a level of engagement. To that end, we just had a groundbreaking about a month ago now in Kearney, Nebraska. And some of the same folks who are on the current building committee for this phase 2 were on the building committee 12 years ago for phase 1. And it's not entirely the same committee. They've got some younger folks, younger families who are involved now. But there's 2 or 3 couples that were a part of that very initial selection who are now a part of this phase 2 process. And that institutional knowledge that they carry into meetings says, no, well, when we were talking about the master plan 12 years ago, these were the things that were important. These are those goals, these are those tracks, those guidelines. And maybe those are tweaking a little bit to accommodate the needs of today, but there's some longevity in being a part of a building committee and understanding your church's particular vision and mission and how that comes to fruition in a physical space, whether that's exterior spaces, a building, outreach or ministry implementation. So I think that's step 1, is defining that team, and then start to do some homework about who are those architects, who are those folks with church experience, and invite them to the table to interview. I think that one, it helps our profession, as we little healthy competition, make sure that everybody's bringing their best to the table for you and your project. But 2, then you have accountability back to the congregation at large that says, we did our research, we talked to these 3 or 4 architecture teams, and we find, as you will, RDG is the best fit for working with our particular church and with our particular goals that we have for our project.
That's a lot of common sense. Get the team together, get them thinking big. But 12 years, okay, John, I've got a theological question for you. If someone is on a facilities team for 12 years, do they automatically qualify to go to heaven?
I've been doing it for 30 years, Dennis. I would like to think so, for sure. So yes, thank you. I would add that the point to the 12 years is if it's going to be that long a process, there's a consistency of that. And I jumped down to D here, develop a calendar of activities. church groups, other than maybe outside of the pastor or minister that's been hired by the congregation, and maybe a financial director, or sometimes, I don't know, communications director. Those are their jobs. The rest of the team is going to be volunteer.
Mhm.
And you want the best volunteers. You want people to understand that. And that's up an A. But we also like to do is develop that calendar of activities. If you're a volunteer, you've got something else to do during the day. Usually you're either at your job, or you're a home, stay-at-home worker in these days, which is a lot more common. But you've got something else to do. And a lot of times you then have to go to pick up kids from practices at 5 to 7 or whatever. So we like to develop a calendar of activities going back to that. How long does a master plan take? Let's just say it's 3 months. We want to sit down with the congregation in the first meeting probably or two, and commit everybody to, here's when we're meeting, here's what you got to cover at the meeting, and here are the decisions that need to be made. Because always people want to know where they're headed, and people want to know what it's going to take to volunteer. And we try to use that time as wisely as we can. And I'm going to jump to the one other word that might stick out to folks is get free consultation. I think what you're trying to say there, Dennis, is that consultation can come in the form of interviews, can come in the form of, as Joe said, talking to somebody about the process, so that when you go out and you do a selection process, you can get real estimates for what that might cost. You don't want to buy a $10,000 project if it costs you 30, because you're not going to get what you need. And likewise, you don't want to buy a $30,000 process if it's something that can be done in 10. So getting that consultation, getting that information is important. We all are in business. We're on business to feed families and to do work. And so the fees we charge need to be realistic. And again, use the time wisely. So we're not taking people's time and not using fees in wallowing around. I don't know if that's the right word, but make whatever you're doing productive.
Sure. Gosh, well, that's a lot of common sense. And even though I've been doing church capital campaigns for facilities for 30 years, I feel like I'm learning really important things from you all. And the importance of the team really has risen to the top, and get them educated and prepared and know what they're facing. That's really very valuable. Your expertise is very valuable, and I appreciate it so much. So as we move.
Hey, Dennis, real quick, maybe if you stay in it long enough, you'll get that free pass to heaven. Who knows?
Well, I need all the help I can get.
Yeah.
And we can all agree on that. Let's hope grace is really true and karma is wrong. Okay.
That's right.
God is forgiving. Oh, golly.
And just in case you're at risk, say a prayer every day. You never know what that'll get you.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. All right. So we have some giveaways from church development. I recommend this book, Best Practices in Parish Stewardship. Here John and Joe and I are part of the 4 Pillars Collaborative. We give away a whole lot of our time. Contact any of us to get connected to these other experts who will volunteer a little bit of their time to help you and that committee get organized. Call or email any of us. This is me, and my phone number and my email. Okay, as we wrap up, Joe, any last comments or thoughts that you'd like to share?
I think, as we've been talking about, a team is important. Making sure that you can work together as your committee and work together with those individuals that you hire. It is relationship based. It is a process. It will take time. And so making sure that you are comfortable and can connect with the team as a whole is important. You want to enjoy the people that you're working with, and it makes the process that much more enjoyable and that much more exciting.
Yeah, that's really true. Those relationships they're the glue that hold us together. John, how about you, buddy? Any last thoughts before we wrap it up?
Sure. Thanks, Des. Mine is have fun. The process, if you do it right, isn't scary. If you do it right and get organized with the right team, it works. It makes it efficient for everybody. And it should be more than a job. It's a volunteer for a lot of people. For us, it's our job. For you, it's your job. But I know I would say 99.9% of projects we work on, we want to have fun with those people as well. Fun in a meaningful way, because you want to enjoy what we're doing and what you're about to embark on. So Dennis, thanks for including us and Joe and I and RDG in this presentation today. We always learn something every time. We like to say, we had a gentleman in our office that said it's a good day if you teach somebody something, and it's a good day if you learn something from somebody else. And if you do that one day, that's a good day.
Oh, that's a wonderful philosophy. Well, you know, as you said that about fun, I really think that that's true. I remember reading a book by Taylor de Chardin, and his quote that sticks with me is something like, "Joy is the infallible sign of the presence of God." So I think seeking God's will in our lives and in our churches and even our facility designs, I can make life joyful. That's how we approach fundraising. We hope that people pray and discern seeking God's will. And when you're in that alignment, there's a particular emotional, spiritual state. I remember reading a book by a guy named Csikszentmihalyi Mihaly, and the term he coined was flow. So when we're in that sense of flow, it is joyful and it is fun, and that's kind of how life ought to be. You know, the joy that you talked about, that's the sign of a good life. So, and this has been joyful. This has been a lot of fun. I want to thank you two so very much for volunteering an hour of your time to share your expertise. Thank you so much. And I will email this out to the other folks. And so you might expect some phone calls and some emails from people wanting to learn a little bit more from you. So I hope that there is a reward for your volunteerism. So to everybody watching, I want to say thank you so much. Go forth, good luck, and God bless. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thanks, Dennis. Take care.
Bye-bye.